Good evening, everyone. We are quickly coming to the end of the book of Second Samuel, and we will be carrying on with First Kings, at least for the first 12 chapters, covering the life of Solomon. Now, in chapter 23, this chapter is really after chapter 22, which was a song that we have covered in a few segments of how David felt towards God, taking care of him, and how he relates to God and how he sees God look at him. Now, in chapter 23, uh, it comes to a point where we are now told that these are the last words of David. Now, what do you mean by the last words? The idea of last, Acharon, really tells us that this is at the end. Well, this word last, this would be uh, at the last part of life, right? Last part of life. How else can we say? Uh, his late his latter years, right? I think we can also call it that, his latter years. This is not the last words in English as we think that it is before he died, right? So please do not see this as words of a dying man, but rather words that he is speaking in his later years in life, or towards the last part of life. I think that would be a much better way of looking at this word last. So these are the things. By words, we don't mean just words that he spoke, but remember, this is davar. Then these would be, how we call this, would be the issues or the matters that he is highlighting in chapter 23. And this is about David. The well, this word here declares, basically says that this is the utterance of David, the son of Jesse, by declaring, giving the fact that he is David. These would be his, well, the, how would you say, things that he spoke, right? He spoke or he uttered as things that he is declaring. Or you could say that these are his sayings. His sayings as, I think, a collection of words as they are compiled here. I think that would be a good way of looking at it. So you can say that these are the collection of sayings that he had made towards the last part of his life. And that is also talking about uh, the word declare here. Again, it's the same word here, the sayings, the sayings of three parts. We can see in this verse the man who was raised on high, the anointed of God of Jacob, the sweet psalmist of Israel. So let's pay attention to some of these words. I think that would help us a little bit. Now, the first one is the man who was raised on high. Uh, this literally tells us that he was low and then he was brought up high in terms of position, in terms of role. So if you recall, the the younger days of David before he was anointed as king uh, wasn't a pleasant, um, how should you say, it wasn't a pleasant type of life. He was considered someone on the outside. When Samuel came to look for the man after God's heart to anoint, he was not included as part of the entourage of the sons of Jesse. And so you find that he was considered abased, low, not significant, but now he is at a high point where he is now raised to be the king of Israel. The second description of David is that he is the anointed of God. Now remember the word anointed. This is important. The second one, anointed, is Mashiach. So he's saying that he is the Mashiach. Mashiach. Okay. Mashiach. The anointed, right? The anointed. In short, we tend to call this person the Messiah in English. And so he is the anointed of the God of Jacob. Now remember, Jacob's other name is Israel. So you can also read this of the God of Israel. And so that would tell us the relationship between God and David. And David is anointed by God. And just as David recognized Saul as God's anointed, he recognizes himself as God's anointed. The next one is a sweet psalmist. Now we call him a psalmist. And I guess he is one who plays music. He is also one who sings. So you can actually see it this way. So as a singer and a music player, and so we are talking about David having this musical talent. And this, I guess, the reason why you find that David is now referring to himself as A, the man who was raised on high, B, the anointed, and C, the singer of Israel, meaning he writes many of the songs that's used in the temple. Uh, and basically, he is somebody now. He is not he is not somebody who has no importance. He is now telling us that as his last words or the last part of his life, he is now recounting the fact that he is in a very prominent position, and not prominent in the eyes of the people, but prominent in the eyes of God in particular. Now, that would be how verse 1 would be better understood, to see that he is recognizing himself a role before God. Verse 2, the Spirit of the Lord spoke through me, and his word was on my tongue. Now, let us take a look. This word here, through me, may be better seen as in me. So the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Jehovah, is understood as his presence. And these two are also an A and a B. So take a look here. This is an A, this is a B. Because of the idea that you see, it's about speaking and the tongue. Now, understand this. This is talking about how God speaks in or through a person. And by a person, here is David. And I guess you can say that by extension to the prophets. It is, in a way, a supernatural encounter that God reveals himself to David and also to the prophet, such that the words that the prophet would speak is not his own words, but it is speaking what God wants him to say. And by that, it is expressed as the presence of God or the Spirit of God in me, in David, and God's word was on my tongue, so that this is how the speech, right? It is about the speech of David would come out. Now, in this chapter, chapter 23, is about the speech of David. You see here, it is about the sayings. These are about the speeches. This is what he said. So these are all interrelated. And so verse 2 gives us a support of verse 1 as the sayings are collected. This is not just what he himself wants to say. It is by extension, this is what God is speaking in him. And that would be an important aspect of how prophets would actually speak. Verse 3, the God of Israel said it. The rock of Israel spoke to me. These are two statements that is what we call synonyms. They are saying the same thing twice. And by way of doing that, this is what we call an A and a B. This is the emphasis of who is speaking, right? Who is speaking? It is the God of Israel, the rock of Israel. Both are actually speaking. So one is saying, one is speaking. But the idea here is to focus on the who. This one here, the El. El would be mighty one. The rock, this is a sur. By rock, we mean one who is a who give protection, to give security, one who defends, one who is trustworthy. And so when we talk about the God of Israel or the rock of Israel, giving us the picture of a cliff, right? A rocky hill, this depicts what God has done for Israel. Also, what God has done for David, that he is the stronghold, one who you can depend on, that you can have confidence on. And this is the mighty one of Israel. This is what he is speaking. This is the one who is speaking. This is the character of the one speaking. Now, what did God actually say here towards David himself? So he says, he who rules over mankind righteously, he who rules in the fear of God. Now, we need to break this down a little bit. The first one, he who rules. He who rules literally means a ruler, right? A ruler. The idea of a ruler here is the one who has dominion. So it's like a king, right? Dominion, one who reigns, one who has power or authority over mankind. Now, this word here is Adam, right? Uh, mankind or humankind, and we're not talking about just Israelites. So we're talking about all mankind. And this, by the way, could be seen as a general principle and a law that's given to a ruler. And this word is not righteously, this word is just, right? This word is just. The king must be just. Now, one of the things you find is that God's character is just, and the king must reflect God's character being just. You find that in the Hebrew Bible, you don't find the phrase God is love, but you always see God is just. And he wants and expects justice to be carried out by people whom he anoints, like kings. And so he says, a ruler or he who rules over a man must be just. And he who rules, right? Same word, he who rules, uh, or he who is ruling, the one ruling, must do so, uh, must do so in the fear of God. Now, the fear of God, you can say, is the terror of God. And this one is to give us a connotation that the king must make good decisions. Good decisions in fear. And this is fear of God based on his words. That he is not to do it in his whims and fancies, but he must do it in a way where it pleases God. That would be the fear of God, in the terror of God, that when he makes a decision, he will need to make a good one, a right one, a one that God will see it to be good and righteous or just as well. Now, in verse 4, it tells us a more poetic expression. The poetic expression is this. Um, this way of ruling, by the way, the king who rules this way, right, is like the light of the morning when the sun rises, a morning without clouds, when the fresh grass springs out of the earth from sunshine after rain. Now we need to understand a little bit of the picture here. Now this is really very much a picture that is described. It is like the brightness, brightness in the morning as it turns from dark to light. When the sun rises as it breaks over the horizon, right? As it breaks over the horizon, that's how we will understand this word. Uh, this would be the sun breaking the horizon. Now, understand that at this point in time, uh, the sky is still dark. And then the sunlight is starting to come out. And that is what this means, right? The sunlight is starting to come out. And so this gives us the picture that when a king rules over his subjects righteously or justly, I think that would be good, with a fear of God, he is like a fresh, well, in the English, we would say a breath of fresh air. But the Hebrew would describe this. This is like the sky is bright. A morning without clouds, it is undimmed. Nothing is clouding it. It's not blocking the sun. Then it says that the fresh grass out of the earth from sunshine after the rain, you find the glistening, reflection of the sun. And basically, you see it glimmering. This is a picture where things are getting bright, things is getting fresh, things is getting good, because the king is good in the eyes of God. The king is just. The king rules with the fear of God and shows the people how to live by the fear of God and doing things justly. And then that is the picture of verse 4. Verse 5. Now it says, "Is my house not indeed so with God?" Now this would not be a question. Unfortunately, it's primed as a question. It should not be primed as a question. It should be a statement. It says, "For my house is not so with God." And by this, you can say that the house of David is dimmed, or it's cloudy. It's not like the bright sunshine that where there's no clouds. So understand that this is the picture that David is looking at his house. My house is not particularly in order. It's in a disarray. My sons are all over the place, have done so many bad things. In fact, many had, a few have also died. So that would be the picture of this verse here. So it's not quite like the English, I'm afraid. So it says, "For my house is not so with God." And he is acknowledging that while God is the sunlight that comes through the darkness, where there is no clouds in the sky to dim it, it is reflected on the wet grass. Well, the house of David is not quite like that. So you can see the poetic way of an imagery that one defines God in bright hope, and one that defines the house of David, which is clouded. That would be a good way of looking at it. Next, he says, "For he has made an everlasting covenant with me, properly ordered in all things, uh, and secured. For he will not indeed make all my salvation and my delight grow." And so, again, there is no question on this one. So look at it as all statements. So let me break this down a little bit. "He has made me an everlasting covenant." Now, this word everlasting covenant is berit olam. Covenant is berit. Everlasting is olam. Now, the word everlasting, olam, is usually translated in the English as forever. And so technically, you can say that he has made with me a covenant that is forever. But because it is olam, we should see it as a long time. And so this covenant is in 2 Samuel chapter 7. We call it the Davidic covenant. And so this is a covenant where God made with David that God will establish the kingdom of David forever, or for a long, long time. So he has made a long, long time agreement with me. And then he says that he has properly ordered all things. Now, the idea is properly ordered all things is that he has uh, prepared. I guess you can say that he has prepared. He has, I guess, arranged. I think arrange is a good word. He has arranged all things for this covenant, right? For this covenant. Uh, and he is also guarding it. He is also, um, how should we say? He's also guarding it, keeping it, right? Keeping it. And this word here, uh, well, this is quite interesting. He will, he is keeping it. Uh, how? Let me just take this away. This is wrong. The translation is a problem. Sorry. Keeping for all my salvation or my deliverance. And so the idea here is God has ordered, has put things in place such that David would be guarded. David is kept secure, and we have seen at his end of his period of life, he's looking back that he can testify that God has indeed protected him and became the salvation of David. And the final uh, verse is, uh, how should we say, for he will not, uh, and okay, this is another problem. And all the desire for he will not sprout forth. That would be the way that Hebrew is translated. So let me just explain this. It says, and all the desire for he will not sprout forth tells us that God has desired in David that there will not be uh, there will not be another king. Will not sprout forth. There will not be another king apart from him. From him, that is David, and seed. That would be one of the ways of actually understanding verse 5. And so this is very much a confirmation that God has made this so-called everlasting covenant and is doing his part of making it secure or guarding it or keeping it by protecting David, being his salvation in all things. And that he is, then the desire of God is that he will not cause another king to sprout forth apart from the Davidic dynasty, meaning it will be David and his kings. It won't be like Saul, where God terminated his dynasty, that his children will not be king. But with David in 2 Samuel chapter 7 is spoken of that his sons will become kings on the throne. Verse 6. Verse 6 is a perspective of the wicked. It says, but the worthless, every one of them are like scattered thorns, for they cannot be taken in hand. And so basically, what it means is the worthless ones are, well, in this case, they are unprofitable, wicked. I guess you could say destructive. or good for nothing. Every one of them is like scattered thorns. The idea of scattered thorns is uh, thorns that is chased away. Okay, that's what it means. Thorns that is chased away, because thorns is not a friend in this case. In this context, the idea of thorns is not friendly. It is to it's something that will hurt, something that is negative, and they cannot be taken in hand. Literally tells us that they cannot be handled, right? They cannot be handled. Literally, you cannot take in the hand because they are thorns and they will poke you and they will hurt you. And this is with regards to people who are wicked, people who are unprofitable, people who are destructive. And this reminds David of many people who are around him. Now, one of the things that we need to understand is even though David is a king of Israel, there are many people around him that are considered wicked, considered who is harmful to David as well. Verse 7, instead, or but if a man touches them, he should be armed with iron and a shaft of spear, uh, and they shall be completely burned with fire in their place. This is the way to deal with the wicked, worthless, destructive. And this is how, as David utters these sayings, these words, that he describes that this is what God is also speaking through him. He says, the man who is going to touch. Now, this idea, touch here, would mean to strike them. Cannot be by hand, right? Cannot use his hand. That's what we have seen, because these people are like thorns. And so he must be armed with iron and a shaft or a staff of spear, right? A staff. That would be a long shaft with a pointed tip at the end. That's a spear. And then they should be completely burned. Now, this word completely burned is an emphatic. It is basically, you find that it is burning. It will be burned. Literally, burning will be burned. And by this, it's a play of two similar words of burn. And so they will be definitely burned. They will be completely burned. They will be utterly burned with fire in their place, right? In their place literally means, how should we say, where they sit, I think, right? In their place means where they sit, or how should we say, where they sit, um, and yeah, in their place, basically to say that that is where they are in their locality. And so they are burnt literally, or destroyed by fire, uh, as if giving the imagery that God has sent fire down to destroy them. That would be a good way of looking at it. Now, very quickly, from verse 8 all the way to the end, verse 8 all the way to the end is now a mention or the list of the names of the mighty men. Now, this word mighty men uh, comes from the word Giborim. These are men who are strong, mighty, brave. What else do you find? Powerful, valiant, and basically they're all heroes, right? They're all heroes. So now I need us to just bear in mind when the Bible talks about mighty men. Um, I hope that you can transport yourself back into the time of David, that he is speaking about the men who is around him. These are the men in the ancient days who will defend the king with their lives. These are the mighty men whom the king depends on, or David depends on. And so you can say that these were the mighty men whom David had, or you can say that they were the ones who served David, right? Who served David. And you can see that this would be a list of people whom David now is impressed, whom David recalls and remembers. And in chapter 23, has found a way into the annals of history as it is recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 23. So let's quickly go through. There are no specific hidden messages here, except for a lot of names and a description of what they have done. So we have the first one. I guess these words are in Hebrew. It literally means he who sat in the assembly um, of the wise. This word Yosha, this word here means he sits. He sits in the assembly. So instead of a word, it's translated as a name, right? So it says he sits in the assembly of the wise, and he's a Techamonite, the head of the word captains here is the head of the head of three parts, not captains, the head of three parts. His name is Adino. He's an Asnite because he is able to kill 800 at one time. So he is a mighty man, a Giborim, right? One of the Gibor. And after him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, and one of the three mighty men with David when they defied Philistines who were gathered there to battle, and the men of Israel had withdrawn. So one of three, notice, one of three parts. That's the second part. And so what did he do? He rose up, struck the Philistines until his hand was weary, clung to the sword, and the Lord gave about victory that day, and the people returned after him only to plunder the dead. Now, in verse 11, we find that after him comes a third one, that is Shammah. And that's where the Philistines gathered and the people fled from the Philistines. He took his hand in the midst of the plot defended it, struck the Philistines, and the Lord brought about a great victory. Then 3 of the 30 chief men who went down came to David at harvest time to the cave of Adullam, while the army of the Philistines was camping in the valley of Rephaim. Now understand that this is the first few verses talk about 3 of the mighty men. In verse 13 is 3 of the 30 chief men. Verse 14, David was then in the stronghold while the garrison of Philistines was in Bethlehem. David had a craving and said that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate. These are all recalling some of the escapades of David and recalling the people who dared. So the 3 mighty men of the 30 went into the camp of Philistine, drew water from the well by the gate, carried back to David. And so you can see that these are the mighty men who stayed by David, who defended David, who took care of David, and David remembers them. Yet he would not drink it, but pour it out as an offering to the Lord. And this describes how David relates to God. He says, "Far be it from me, Lord, that I would do this. Should I drink the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives? Because the 3 mighty men went into enemy territory to bring water." So he would not drink it. These 3 mighty men did, because they needed to survive. And so these are all the episodes that David recalls, how his men was willing to give up their lives to defend their king. Verse 18, Avishai, I think you would know this. Avishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was the chief of the 30. Then what did he do? He did this. He swung his spear against 300 and killed them, and had a name as well as the 3. So Avishai is good. We do not see Joab because Joab is not mentioned in this. He was the most honored among the 30, so he became their commander, Avishai. But he did not attain to the reputation of the 3 because the 3 risked their lives for David. We see in verse 20, we have Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. He was a valiant man, done great deeds. He killed 2 sons of Ariel of Moab. This is an enemy. He went down and also killed an Ariel. Now, this is interesting. In verse 20, says that he smote 2 mighty men of Moab. He also killed a lion in the middle of a pit on a snowy day. Now, it is rare to see snow in Israel, but there is snow in Israel. He killed an Egyptian, as we remembered, Benaiah in the last few chapters, an impressive man. Now, what do you mean an impressive man? He has great stature. Great stature. That is what it means by impressive, right? It is not that he is looking handsome. So he is a man that for viewing, when you look at him, you are at awe. I don't think that you are seeing him as a handsome Egyptian, but he is an aggressive, big person, an Egyptian with a spear in his hand. But he went down to him with a club and snatched the spear from the Egyptian, killed him with his own spear, and that's Benaiah. These things Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, did, and had a name as well as the 3 mighty men who went to Bethlehem to fetch water. So notice, David is now coming back and seeing all these are the people who had actually stuck their lives out and their neck out, so to speak, for David. And so he was honored among the 30, but did not attain the reputation of the 3. And David appointed him as his bodyguard, the one who is to protect David. Now, this word bodyguard um, has a, I guess, has an understanding uh, that he is made, he's placed over the guards following him. So he's the chief of these guards. So that is why the English translated it as bodyguard in that sense. Next, we have uh, Ashael, the brother of Joab, was among the 30. So we have Ashael, we have um, Avishai. He was among the 30, and there was Elhanan, the son of Dodo of Bethlehem. Then Shammah the Harodite, Elika the Harodite. We just quickly go through the names so that you have a feel of it. Then we have Halex, and then we have Yira. Then we have Aviedzer. We have Mabunai. Then we have Zalmon. We have Mahrai. And then we have Helef. Then we have Yitai, verse 30. And then again, we have Benaiah. Then we have Hidai. We have here Avi Alvon. This would be Atzmave. This is El Yachba. Who else we have here? We have here Shammah, and then we have Achiam, verse 34. We have Eliphelet, the son of Avishai. Then we have Eliam. We have Chetzrai. Chetzrai. This is Pa'arai. This would be Ikal. This would be Bani. This would be Zelek. This is Nachrai. And these are the armor bearers of Yoav. And finally, our last two verses, we have Ira. This is Garev. And finally, Uriah. 37 of these men, and you can count them all. And David remembers them all. One of the things that you find is that many of the names are repetitive. And you find that these are the ones usually in the Hebrew culture, they like to reuse names. And so just like in Western culture, many people are called by the same names. And so in Hebrew culture, they also like certain names and they will name their children the same way. And so when we read the Bible, we need to be careful that although they may have the same names, we need to know who their fathers are so that we know who exactly are they talking about. Now, one of the questions that people did ask is that would this Uriah or Uriah, the Hittite, would be the husband of Bathsheba? Now, it might well be, right? It might well be because he gave his life for David as well in that sense. And so you find that these are the men who are considered valiant, powerful, heroes, mighty, and they are not fearing opposition and particularly willing to defend David on the throne. Now, with this, we come to the end of chapter 23 so that we understand At the end of David's life, or towards the end, and this is the later part or the latter part of his life, he recalls all the deeds that his men had done for him. Yoav is not part of this. Yoav will be discussed a little bit more in the next chapter. And Yoav is not known as one of the valiant men. Yoav is not seen as one of these valiant men who would die for David or who would fight for David to defend him. Although Yoav did many things to clean up the problems that arose because of David. Nevertheless, he is not seen as one of this 37 mighty men. Now, with this, we come to the end of our session today.